All right. That was an information item, so we will go on to the next one, which is the overview of CalWorks.
I believe we have a handout. I think this one? Great. I think the sergeant is bringing you our short handout.
Thank you very much.
Again, given the late hour, I'll go quickly through the overview so then we can turn to questions, but happy to take more questions. Sort of on page 1 of the handout is just the barest highlights of what the CalWorks program is. I mean, CalWorks is a cash assistance program a cash assistance and welfare to work services program for our families with children. It's California's version of the federal temporary assistance for needy families program, which operates as a block grant to states, then wide discretion in terms of how the states use the funds and serve individuals with both those funds and maintenance of effort dollars. There are also specific penalties on states for not meeting statewide work participation rates. In California, we are a state-supervised, county-administered program working with our 58 county partners. In addition to welfare to work services, job training, barrier removal, all the things designed to help families become self-sufficient and make that transition, a focus of CalWorks is combating child poverty. Key to California's principles and the way the bipartisan program was designed is the commitment to children in the form of what we would call the safety net. And that says even if the parents reach the end of a time limit or perhaps reach or are unwilling to work or unwilling to meet our program mandates and see a sanction, even in that case, we still aid the children. And California's commitment, I think, is shown in the national data that we serve approximately 50% of the, again, under the old poverty measure, and we've had discussions about the complex world of poverty measures, but under the old lower measure, we serve approximately 50% of the children in our CalWorks program, whereas the comparable number in the nation is only 20%. There's over 1 million children on CalWorks. We're serving about 560,000 families right now. That's a high-level overview of the program. Would you like me to turn to some questions I think you had about grants? Yes.
Yes.
If you move to, maybe we'll skip page 2 and go to page 3 of the handout. I'll work from that for a moment. This is more of a reference table, essentially, again, showing the caseload in that first column over the last several years. Essentially, the caseload did go up substantially during the Great Recession. You see that it peaked in 2000, actually peaked around June of 2011. And then since then has been declining ever so slowly. Grants are a function of family size. There's a different grant for each additional member of the family. It's also a function of income. As a family earns income, the grants go down pursuant to what we call the disregard system. There are other factors that affect the grant as well. The far right-hand side shows you what the actually that's showing the CalFresh at the far right. The second to the far right actually shows what we call the maximum aid payment or MAP for a family of 3 in Region 1. We actually have a system of regional grants. About 60% of the state is in what we call higher cost areas, and their grants are 4.9% higher than the rest of the state. That's a little note about the grants. There was a 5% grant increase that went into effect in March, pursuant to new legislation that essentially created a year ago that created a dedicated fund source for funding increases in CalWorks grants. We measure how much is in the fund against what an additional grant increase would cost. At the January budget, there was not quite enough to essentially trigger an additional grant increase, but that will be looked at again in May and looked at each year. Even if there is not enough, the 5% grant increase maintains. We just would wait until we do the next one. It's never a question of retrenching. That's a little note about grants. Any other questions on that page?
And I think you answered the caseload trends. You talked about the peak and then the decrease. Are there any other trends into the future?
The longer term trend is, again, with the economy recovering, we're expecting slight decreases over the coming years is the long-term guesstimate. In a moment, I think we'll be talking about some of the more recently enacted policies and how they may affect caseload as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me just make sure I know where I am. Okay.
I was on page 38.
Yeah. Department of Finance, LAO. All right. Public comment.
Madam Chair, Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. Only just on this issue of grants, we would note that grants continue to be significantly below the poverty level. In fact, our average, the maximum family grant for a family of 3 right now is 40% of the federal poverty level. That puts families essentially what we call into deep poverty. And as we've testified at this committee before and in the assembly committees, children who grow up in such deep poverty experience what's called a form of toxic stress, which leads to a host of long-term concerns about children and their ability to function in school and later to be a successful member of society. So increasing grants, increasing the size of grants by reducing policies that reduce grant size, such as exclusionary policies like maximum family grant, are things that we hope this committee will take a strong look at in this budget and in the coming years.
Thank you. I can hear you.
Okay, great. Jill Adams with the Center on Reproductive Rights and Justice at UC Berkeley School of Law. A trifold set of inaccurate assumptions commonly underlies child exclusion policies like the MFG rule. The first is that welfare beneficiaries have large families when, in fact, most CalWORKs families have 1 or 2 children, consistent with the average, the California's general population. The second assumption is that they have more children in order to increase their cash aid. However, research indicates that this meager grant increase, which is an average of $122 per month in California, does not, in fact, motivate childbearing. Conversely, the third assumption is that families will have, the third assumption is that they will stop having children if cash aid is denied. However, multiple studies conducted in California and other states with child exclusion policies have failed to show any clear connection between these caps and a reduction in birth rate.
1 minute. Thank you very much.
Sarah Layton, resident of Oakland. So not only is the maximum family grant rule ineffective, it actively undermines the goals of the CalWORKs program, which is to provide transitional support to low-income families. Families on CalWORKs are trying to re-enter the workforce, but when we deny aid for a newborn, it only makes it harder for them to gather the resources they need to become employed and forces them deeper into poverty. It's in everyone's best interest to support these families. Other states have realized this. Of the 24 states that first adopted this rule, 1/3 of them have repealed it. California has had this ineffective and harmful policy on the books for 20 years, and it's time to get rid of it.
Thank you very much.
I'm here with Access, Ellen Corbett District. I am in big support of this bill because my family is impacted from this bill. I have been supporting 2 children receiving $317 a month. Currently, my 18-month-old does not receive any benefits. How do we feed, clothe, and shelter 2 children with $317 a month? It's very difficult, discouraging, and shameful, and I am unable to provide the needs for my children. We need support.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, Senator Monning, Ashley Morris here on behalf of the ACLU of California. We strongly urge a repeal of the MFG rule in this year's budget. California has long been a leader in reproductive justice and supporting the reproductive health decisions of women and their families. But the MFG rule undermines that. The MFG rule is coercive and allows exceptions only in cases of rape, incest, and failure of certain long-acting or permanent contraceptives defined in the law, none of which a woman can initiate or terminate on her own. These limited exceptions also require women to reveal private medical information to the government in order to receive benefits. Not only does the MFG rule deny vital resources to children, but it punishes poor women and poor families for their reproductive decisions. Families should be able to make the best reproductive decisions for themselves, no matter their income. We strongly, strongly, strongly urge a repeal of the MFG rule in this year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Rebecca. Oh, did I turn it on? There we go. National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. We also strongly support the repeal of the maximum family grant rule. It not only, it hurts families, and it also interferes in the private reproductive choices of women. And we really urge the legislature to take that action.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, I'm from Access, which is a reproductive health line based in Oakland. Many of our callers are impacted by CalWORKs and the MFG rule. I wanted to tell you a story about one of our callers whose daughter, who is capped by the MFG rule, was hospitalized, and the mother had to take 2 weeks off of work. And I think that this case shows that the MFG rule is undermining the intent of CalWORKs, because the state is having to pick up the bill for ill children, and also the mother is not able to continue working during that period. So Access supports the repeal of the maximum family cap. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maricela Munoz, and I'm here to ask you guys for your help. I've been struggling with my family since 2009. Me and my kids will be homeless for the past 4 years. I'm here on behalf of my 4 kids. We just receiving $317 every month since last year, because that's when my son Remy filed for the service.
Okay.
It's okay, baby. It's okay, baby. So I'm here to ask you guys to stop the MFG rule, so we can be able to go ahead and be more stable in our lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here.
And I'm a single mother of two. At one point, when my son was 2 weeks old, we were evicted from our apartment, and the only money I was getting was for him. It was $362. If I hadn't had that money, I don't know where it is now. Now, just last month, they sent me a letter saying that he is an MFG rule or whatever. And I've been informed that the next step is that they're going to make me pay back for their mistake. So now that I've gotten back on my feet, it's like they're pulling the rug from underneath me for a mistake that I didn't make.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
Tia Orr, on behalf of the Service Employees International Union, we represent eligibility workers who see these clients many days a day. We would ask for the reasons that the families.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Kevin, Coalition California Welfare Rights Organization. MFG rule is one of the barbaric rules that have been established in the state. And actually, in California, it's a very punitive program. About 500,000 children are being punished for various reasons, for sanctions, for no immunization, for 101 ways. And actually, kids is deep in poverty, and it hurts kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Frank Mecca, Executive Director of the County Welfare Directors Association. We're co-sponsors of SB 899. You trust our members to run a variety of programs to fight poverty, move people from welfare to work, and do it with the most efficient use of the taxpayer resources, and the family cap fails on all accounts. We'd urge you to eliminate the maximum family grant rule and allow us to help people move from welfare to work.
Thank you.
Luann Nguyen with the East Bay Community Law Center on behalf of the 130 or so thousand children, 134,000 children who are subject to this rule, the 550,000 families on CalWORKs, and really on behalf of all Californians as a taxpayer, I'm asking that this not only be the top priority in your budget item for CalWORKs, but it would be and should be your top priority for the budget period. And this is why. First, you know, when you're thinking about investing in families and building houses, you think about the foundation. I really believe that children and the moms are the foundations of these families. And if you punish the foundation and do build a house without a foundation, it will not work. And people will not be able to achieve the welfare to work components that you want them to achieve. Give people the basic needs that CalWORKs is supposed to do, and then ask them to do more. But to ask them to do more without that basic need is an unfair and unreasonable and untenable request. 2, this policy increases homelessness, it increases truancy in school, it increases placement in foster care, it increases hospitalization, it reduces children's developmental capacity, and in essence, it doesn't work. If the purpose is to punish mothers so that they don't have any poor children, the 134,000 figure that we see is telling us that is not working. Let's not keep a policy on the book that does not work and that punishes families and make them worse. And I know we're going to say there's not enough money, let's do it next year, this is not the administration's top priority. When will it ever be the top priority? These are kids that we are talking about. We are 20 years into this policy. We've waited. It's racist. It needs to go. And when something is so incredibly unjust and so incredibly unfair and detrimental, we not only need to look at the price, but we need to think about the price we are willing to pay for equality and a fair playing field. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you for all your testimony. This was also an informational item. So without objection, we will go on to the next item. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
the implementation item.
Your agenda then moves to the area of implementation of SB 1041, which were some of the significant changes that we made. I believe you all have a series of questions on page 42. I think your agenda does a good job of essentially summarizing the key changes that were made in 1041. Essentially, we created a flexible 24-month clock, which eliminated the federal core work requirement. We aligned the work hours of participation with the federal level. We used to have it used to be regardless of family size, it was 32 hours for families, but the federal requirement is 30 and 20 if you have a child under age 6, so we aligned to those. We also phased out what we called the young child exemptions. That was kind of a budget policy decision made by the prior administration and the legislature. It certainly had fiscal logic in that when the Congress in 2009 passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, it provided substantial funding to pay for grants for CalWORKs and TANF programs. However, and it also provided money for subsidized employment. But what it didn't provide was money for child care and services and welfare to work services and the service array that California wants to provide and did provide and strives to provide under CalWORKs. So essentially, there was a reduction in the budget of around $270 million to the funds that the counties had, and the way we made that manageable was we exempted a group of people either that had 2 young children or a child under age 2. That is essentially what SB 1041 slowly phases out. We've done that through a process of the way we've implemented those changes in 1041 is through all county letters and regulations. That all county letter process is an extensive stakeholder process where we work with advocates and counties before issuing those. I think your next question is about, again, goes back to a little bit earlier about caseload. So if you could go in my handout, little bit out of order, go to page 7. I've got a chart with a lot of boxes on it. Okay. I will try to give you the short answer first, and if the short answer is sufficient, maybe we'll stop there. If you'd like, we can walk you through in detail. But essentially, what this chart, what we attempted to do here was we were asked is, well, as you implement this 24-month clock, this flexible 24-month clock, which essentially says for 24 months, families don't have to meet the federal core, non-core distinction. They can really be engaged in any activity that meets the CalWORKs broader standards that can help them become self-sufficient. Those could be education-focused approaches without necessarily any of the more work-related things that the feds require. After those 2 years, under the 24-month clock, you then need to meet the higher federal standard, which would be employment, either subsidized or unsubsidized. It could also be on-the-job training. It could also be work experience. It's not necessarily a job, but nonetheless, it is a higher barrier. It's a higher level participation mandate to meet. So it's a fair question. Well, as we roll through this 2 years from now, or as I'm going to say, really 3 years, because if you engage in an education activity, education is actually countable under the federal for 1 year. So you can get 1 year of that, and then you could have 2 years. So depending what track you're on, at the end of 2 to 3 years, you do need to meet the higher standard. And what we've done here in this chart is try to estimate, using the best data we have, which is really data we have about participation, and it's also data that looks at our 4-year clock, because we're just starting to load in the data having to do with the new 2-year clock. What we've essentially estimated is when fully implemented by the end of about 16, 17, we estimate approximately 13,500 families are possibly going to suffer a grant reduction because they weren't able to meet that higher standard. That's essentially the box down to the right where it says grant reduction full, 13,500. The concept of phased is this doesn't all happen at once. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're phasing in the requirement of when families need to meet. The families had those young child exemptions. We're phasing that in. Some families are also engaged in education activities that might be federally countable for a year. So we won't reach an equilibrium for a few years. So our full estimate is the 13,500. What we show you along the bottom in the boxes is what will happen in budget plus one. Again, not the budget we're looking at, but in 15-16, it shows that a little over 600 a month will essentially encounter this and potentially not be able to meet it and see the grant reduction, leading to about 6,700 in June of 16. An average of 3,700 for the year. That's sort of the quick answer of the out-year impacts of the 2-year clock. If you'd like, we can go into more detailed assumptions within the boxes, but that's sort of the bottom line answer. I think your next question, back on page 42, if I may, was the status of early engagement. So I hear what I'd like to do is go, sorry, my handout's a little out of order compared to your agenda, so you got to go back a few pages, and some of this was put in your agenda. Back on page 4 begins essentially what I would call the 3 pillars of AB 74. What came on the heels of SB 1041 was the administration's commitment to work with the legislature to essentially make the very most of those 2 years. And in doing that, we held work groups, and then in last May, we brought forward, a year ago, a proposal to essentially improve CalWORKs, and it had 3 key focuses. One was an online California appraisal tool, and essentially my handout on page 4 summarizes some key features of that. We built on the Federal Administration for Children and Families. They're our overseeing agency. They worked with ICF International to actually develop software, and the software is free. And we actually had a work group where we actually looked at that. The software was free, but the customization is not. So we have a $1.4 million contract with them to customize the software. It is. So that is the process that we are in, and we're very excited. We're using a stakeholder process to essentially customize that tool. We signed our contract right at the end of February. We're letting some counties use the tool right out of the box. The tool has been tested. It's been used in other states. It's been validated. But it needs that California flavor. It needs to have our rules, our way of thinking about program requirements reflected in it. So that's what our work groups are working on and advising. Based on the changes to kind of make it fit California, we'll then go into a pilot testing mode. When the pilot testing is complete, we're hoping to have it available statewide in all the counties in September. That's an aggressive schedule, but that's what we want in September of 14. We really think this will help. Again, the whole point of our program for the families that are able to work is let's identify the barriers. Let's figure out what that family needs. Let's not have them in the wrong activities at the wrong time, disconnected from services and activities. Let's find out what they need and get them the services they need. So that is one pillar of AB 74, one pillar of how the administration wants to move forward to make the most of the CalWORKs program. Another key pillar is on the next page is family stabilization. This is a recognition that CalWORKs people come into CalWORKs, they're facing very difficult situations. They're caring for young children. They're dealing with unemployment. They're dealing with a lot of problems. Some of them have such significant barriers and are, say, caring for a disabled family. They might actually be exempt from participation under our rules. But there's other folks, although they wouldn't necessarily be exempt, we think they could benefit from welfare to work. They may not be ready because they're facing a crisis. The crisis might have to do with homelessness. It might have to do with domestic violence. So the idea of the family stabilization program was essentially let's intensely case manage those cases and try to get them ready for to be able to use the 2 years. And as the key dates at the top said, we've issued guidance in February, and counties are submitting plans. And again, the table both in my handout, and I think it's also repeated in your agenda, we've asked the counties to produce plans about how they're going to do family stabilization. We've received 49 of those plans, and as the chart shows, they're focusing on things such as homelessness, mental health, substance abuse, domestic abuse. Some of them are focusing on weekly client contact with home visits and phone calls. So again, we're excited about this program. It's now available in all the counties. The last pillar of again the proposals last May in AB 74 designed to make the most of CalWORKs is what we call expanded subsidized employment. California was, I think, pioneer might not be the word, but our counties and what we did under the Recovery Act funds, California created, I believe, almost 50,000 subsidized employment jobs. After that funding went away, that ramped down a lot to just a few thousand. California also had experience under the AB 98 legislation creating subsidized jobs. So with last year's proposal in AB 74, we put in funding for 8,200 slots to be fully ramped up by the end of this fiscal year. We think it may take a little longer. It may go into the coming budget year for the counties to actually reach that 8,250 total. But the money's out there. The guidance is out there. So far, we have received 20 plans to date. The budget calls for expanding this $39 million investment. The fully ramped up budget for 14-15 is $134 million. We're very excited about that. Those are kind of the three pillars. They are up and running now. In terms of measuring, which I think is your fourth question, how will we measure? I think there's sort of two tracks here. One is, again, going back to the SB 1041 legislation, it required the department to have an independent evaluator. And we are in the final stages of signing the contract with our evaluator. And that will include a process study, a recipient status study. It will look at impacts. It will include tracking of cohorts. So I think it's going to provide some of that information. But beyond that, we'll also be looking at our administrative data. We'll be looking at our Welfare to Work 25 reports, which show us, it doesn't show us the number of hours that a client is working in a certain area, but at least it shows us what activities they're doing and what they're moving into. That will be, I would say, a combination of looking at administrative data and holding essentially our oversight work group, having those discussions with them and the legislature, along with interim progress reports that will come out of the study with our independent contractor. That's how we're going to monitor. Further questions on 1041 and AB 74?
think not. Any questions, Senator Monning? All right, thank you. Thank you for the comprehensive review. Department of Finance, legislative analyst. All right, thank you very much. We've completed implementation. Now on to, wait, public comment, pardon me.
Yes.
Yeah, either way is fine. We set that up because we had some longer lines earlier today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that courtesy. I'm Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty, and I just want to comment on the SB 1041 and 74 provisions that we just heard discussed. In a very brief amount of time, a couple of things. One is we've made so many significant changes to the Welfare to Work program in the last several years. It's becoming increasingly difficult for line staff, for legal service attorneys, and certainly for our clients to actually manage all the complexities that we have now built into the program. And as we heard testimony in yesterday's assembly hearing, the clients come into the program and their lives are often in crisis and in chaos, and we're asking them to make incredibly significant, monumental decisions about how they use their limited 24 months at a time when they really can't focus on that or really kind of see out a couple of years the best way for them to use this clock. And so while there certainly are some benefits to the rules that were built into that system, it's also the case that our clients' clocks are ticking and they may not be able to really take advantage of those rules. And we're very concerned about that. And one of the things that we're seeing already, and I think you saw from Mr. Bland's presentation, is that when you look out, as the 24-month clock becomes fully implemented, we're seeing that there will be 11,000 people who are sanctioned as they hit that 24-month clock. And then over time, we'll see another 13,500 families who will become non-compliant and sanctioned also. So virtually 1 out of every 3 families after the 24-month clock hits will face a reduction in their benefits, and the data around the implementation on the ground in the first 12 months of the program is indicating a sanction rate of a comparable level. About 1 out of every 3 families from January 13 to January 14, there was a 13% increase in the number of families who were sanctioned. And so I think this is a major policy issue for the legislature to consider. Have we done too much, too fast, and we need to think about, is this fair to the clients, and is there something we should be looking at that makes this more fair to clients so that they really can take advantage of the educational opportunities to move out of poverty? We have many other observations and concerns about the clock. I know I only have a limited amount of time here, and I would be happy to talk about you more in private and with the consultant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin Asner, Coalition California Welfare Rights Organizations. We also consider about the 24-month clock. There's only 3 states in America who have a 24-month clock. About 31 or 35, 39 of them have 60 months, and about 19 or 20 of them are red states. So California is doing pretty bad. And these clocks basically sentence children to deep poverty. And we need to really look at this before, because it's going to hurt a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. This is an informational item, so without objection, we'll go on to the next item, Welfare to Work Performance Oversight.
Thank you. This is a budget change proposal this year for essentially 8 positions related to to support essentially 3 things. First is the county peer review process. This is for the state staff to work with the counties on identifying best practices to improve work participation. It's also to help with the implementation of all those changes in SB 1041. And it's also for implementation of something that we haven't talked about, which is what we call the Work Incentive Nutritional Supplement, or WINS. That's a program authorized by the legislature. It will be brought up right at the end of June, beginning of July this year. It's a key component of how the state will meet that federal work participation rate, as what it will do is essentially provide a food benefit it will find an additional food benefit to CalFresh families that are working and that meet the federal requirements. Will allow them essentially to come into that fraction. It's sad that federal policy on TANF is now reduced to a fractions lessons, but it's all about numerator denominator, essentially brings them into both the numerator and the denominator, pushes up our fraction substantially. It's a key component, and 2 of the positions would have to do with data monitoring with that. 4 of the positions would have to do with the county peer review system, and then 2 additional research analysts to essentially do some of that data work, to work on with the independent contractor, to be able to provide the information the legislature and that we and the counties are looking at about performance and what's happening. And I committed yesterday with the Assembly, and I would commit to your staff as well to sit down and talk about what are the key pieces of information the legislature needs. We publish a lot of stuff about CalWORKs. It's in our subvention binder, in our fiscal documents. It's also in other places, but some of it's on the web. Some of it can be hard to find, and some of it is special runs. So if there are certain pieces of information that would work better, that would help us, I commit to working with staff over the summer to identify those, and we'll try to come up with a more routine way and maybe an easier way of kind of putting all that in one place.
Okay.
Urge your support for our BCP and my division.
Thank you very much. Department of Finance, legislative analyst. Public comments? Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I turned my head.
Ryan Woolsey from the Legislative Analyst Office. I only wanted to mention that our office did review the proposal and we raised no issues with it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Public comments? All right, this is recommended to stay open, so without objection, we'll move on to the last item. A proposal to eliminate temporary assistance program, the TAP.
Yeah, essentially, TAP was something enacted several years ago, and it's been delayed several times. It was essentially looking at doing something that in a moment I'll describe we're sort of doing anyway. But as originally conceived, it had a statutory framework and of essentially taking certain families and moving them outside of the TANF program, moving them outside not only TANF funding, but out of the maintenance of effort. At the time we were first working on it after it was enacted back in 2008, there were issues around child support, and our Department of Child Support Services was then very engaged in finishing a automation system that they were bringing up, and hundreds of millions of dollars of penalties were at stake at that time. So we were not able to work at that time to sort of solve some of the issues around that. What we'd asked for and what the legislature has granted several times is essentially a delay in that. Where we stand today is a year ago in the I confuse which budget we did it in. I want to say we did it first in 12-13, but it's actually only gone into effect more recently. We've essentially been able to implement this without law so far, where we've essentially taken certain cases. These are essentially what we call the safety net cases, where we move them out of, essentially we move them out of the fraction. We take them out of the denominator, we take them out of the numerator, and that pushes up your fraction because we're not taking too many out of the numerator, we're taking a lot out of the denominator. And we've been able to more or less achieve that without the statute. So at this point, we would just be asking, we see no reason for the TAP statute. If the legislature prefers, we could certainly live with again, a delay of it.
All right, any questions, Senator Monning? All right, Department of Finance, legislative analyst, any comments from the audience? All right, thank you very much. This is also recommended to stay open. So thank you very much for that presentation. I know we'll be talking with you some more about that. And I think that is the last presentation for the day. So thank you all very much. It was a nice long hearing with lots of great participation. We appreciate it all. And we will be continuing to discuss all these issues. And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.